Okay. Okay, so I wasn't supposed to do that. Oh dear. So what do I do? Oh, because if I end it, it will end the broadcast. Okay. I'm sorry. So what does that mean? That you no longer have control?
Hi, Mary.
I pushed the wrong button.
No, you did.
So we lost our a couple of minutes before we start, but I don't want to start the whole thing over because it's not that big a deal.
Yeah. Yeah, I that's okay. So here we go. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Sarah.
Jotham, hi, Mary.
I've been having so much fun at these events. Steve, great job.
Steve, it was wonderful. I loved it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being there. That was fun. The students were amazing.
They've been they were so more relaxed in these things.
Yeah,
I've been loving that. You know, like at Candace's doing the readings. They're just, you just can tell they love language. They love being with each other. It's been really sweet.
They really do. They have these conversations going on while
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, same here.
It's been a great week.
It's like we're running a graduate program here.
I know.
Yeah, it's true.
So I messed up a bit already. I've never used Crowdcast, so I gather I wasn't supposed to hit, get started. So, so if you guys have questions about how to handle your end of it, we're going to ask now, even though people can listen in to what we're saying, because we're not in a green room separated. We're in front, like anybody who's coming to the event can hear us now, just so you know.
Oh, really? Hi, everybody.
Yeah. Sarah, you're mute. Can't hear you.
Trying out those fancy headphones. Mary, I had one question. Steve brought it up in email. Are we going to do the? Are we going to do any text on screen?
No, I think because again, I've done Teams, I've done Zoom, I've done WebEx, but I haven't done this, and so I didn't even know if there was an option for doing that. So
Christiana can hear me; she could figure it out.
But that's up to each of you. If you would like text on the screen, that's fine. So Sarah's having trouble with her mic. Uh-oh.
Yeah. Sarah, when I've had trouble before with Crowdcast, I logged out and came back in, and that helped.
Yeah, behold the problems of technology. For all of those who are listening in, you can listen to us as we navigate getting ready for the big show. I launched us too soon, but that's all right. And hey, Ryan, I see you up there. Ryan Day, Erica. Oh my gosh, I've seen some Jaff Oaks. It's been so great to see names up on the board and all week, both yesterday and this morning.
Yeah,
we had good turnout. We've been doing amazing. Hunter's here. That's awesome.
Okay, Miles was able to add pronouns to her
that's really great. Okay, awesome. Hey, Colin, Danny, wow, this is fantastic. Some of you have been going to more than one event. It's incredible.
Yeah, I see some names that I saw.
People are really putting out this week.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Kai or Kay Santiago. My first time participating in an event like this. Very excited. Very awesome. Fantastic. Yeah, this was the closest I came to feeling like I was on campus, and I've been missing everyone. Oh, so who straps up?
Yeah, you can do it. That's mine. So you just do it yourself. You just go in the middle, and it just says share. You have to go to the top of your box where your picture
where it says share. Yep.
Share screen, and then you pick entire screen, application window, or Chrome tab. So if you want to do it, I did type it out. I might do it.
I did not, so I'm just gonna read. So
yeah, well,
but
it's just a few lines.
Probably nice for people to see the text too, but that's.
Well, you kind of motivated me to do it, Steve, and then there you go.
And then I saw Mary's email.
Now he's jumped ship and he's left you alone to post text.
That's okay. That's okay. Just a few lines, as you said.
A little variety from
Sarah. Did Sarah come back yet? Not.
I don't see her yet. And I
don't
don't
see
see Amanda yet.
Amanda's not going to come yet because remember the limit on number of people can be on the
Right.
screen.
So she'll be in the audience.
So we're going to
perhaps?
bump you off into the general audience and then bring her onto the screen. That hasn't changed. I mean, basically the only thing that changed is we didn't get to do a little bit of a walkthrough with the tech here.
Just bump me gently, please. Okay.
Hey, D. D. Gable,
D.
Darlene.
Gable, yes. D's in the house. Wow.
Molly
That's a twofer for
Pollack.
her.
Awesome. Amanda's
There she is.
here. I hope it works when I'm called up. Sarah, is it happening?
Can
Thank
you hear me
Thank you,
now?
Miles.
Yes!
Correct.
Hooray.
We can hear you. Great.
Fantastic. We are just minutes from launch into this third and final event of the week. And I feel like I'm on a radio show. When I did Writing Jam, I used my little wing chime to like start things off. I love the sound of that. Gives me positive vibes. Let's see who else is here. And Darlene, that's so awesome that you and Corrine have really been putting out. Let's do a big shout out to our 2 administrators in our department. They've been doing posters. They've been showing up. The students don't always even know who they are. And they're like behind the scenes doing all this good stuff to make this happen. And again, a big shout out to Christiana Torres, who has done a great job. And I've done a terrible job following directions. So whatever problems occur are mine.
I just got a text that my volume is very low. Is that the case for you guys?
Yours is a little low.
I can't, I have no control over it. It's on my computer screen, it's as high as it goes. So I don't know. I'll just
I can hear you all right.
Okay. Yeah, it'll have to suffice, I guess.
So Christiana, can you hear everybody?
Yeah, she can hear everybody. I've been texting her.
Okay.
She's on the ball. You don't have to do anything. She's going to make us go and be small and all that stuff. She's got it all.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
Great.
She's right beside you, Mary, in the wings of the theater.
In the wings of the theater. I do like this concept. I like this platform
She's
set up the way.
She's in the wings of the theater.
Yep.
Yep. So, Mary, I did send you a little introduction to thank a few people. You saw that?
I did not. I've been checking my email a lot today. So what I can do is have you do that. Why don't you just give it? But I have been checking my email all day. I did not see it. Because I expected you to send it, actually.
Yeah.
By the way, Crowdcast says you can now have 6 people on stage at once. I don't know if that's like extra pay or whatever.
Yeah,
Probably.
we researched it. It's extra. We have
extra
one level.
money.
It's a different level.
Doesn't meet the current budget.
Yes, Miles, you're an audience member. Everybody can hear well. Max can hear well. Good. We can see people starting to stream in. We'll be starting in just like 2 or 3 minutes. I appreciate you all showing up for these events this week. I hope some of your professors gave you a class off at least, or no homework for the week. I did that for my classes. My students have totally shown up.
Okay. Mine too.
Yeah, Daria. Hello, Professor Collins and Ostrowski. Long time no see. Wow,
Hi,
we're gonna have some people.
Yeah, there's a blast.
Wow, that's great. Claire's back. Claire, you've been so fantastic all day. You participated in Ostrowski's event today. That was really fun.
Boy, I was talking to Linda Valerie afterwards, and we've been doing the permission thing for years, but she was saying, and I agree, that we heard some of the best stuff.
You were saying that a lot of the times people get stumped, and yet our students were so into it. They weren't stumped at any stage. They were so excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, I really stuff I wanted to steal because it was so good,
You publish it first. It's yours.
That's right. Hey, Julia. I see Julia Conant. This is great. Somebody slept and had an anxiety attack that they have missed Professor Strong's class.
Oh, no.
Oh, well, we didn't bring you to the beach, but we have brought some fun this week. Yes.
Mary,
Very
I sent you
excited.
the email again.
But I don't know how to access it because I'm using my computer for this show. That's the problem. I'm sorry, Jotham, but I really did. You know what? Let me try on my phone.
It doesn't
Okay.
matter.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Let me do it. But I have been looking all day. I knew you were going to send me that. Here we
you can get
go.
on your phone.
I got
You're going to
it.
be up by. You're going to be when the show does start. You're going to be up by yourself.
Yeah, that's all right. I got it. I got it on my phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, the only issue with my little mistake was that we didn't really have a little trial up front, but it's not a big deal.
No, as a matter of fact, it's a behind the scenes look at the green room.
You know what? I'm not going to get stressed about that.
No way.
Deanna's here. Oh, good. Oh, it's so great to see some of these students. What?
I like Cheyenne's comment. We are writing lovers.
I know. Kyla
That's a good-
Cohen. What?
That's another
Hey,
good
everyone.
title.
It's a good chance to take a moment and see who's here, actually, because once we get started, I'll be focused on other things. So this is actually very sweet.
Looks like we're over 100.
In the chat over there, by the way, that address, if someone does in the audience or someone gets logged out, that's a direct link back into the room.
Okay.
FYI, cool. We have that. Like everything, you can do a walk around if you have to. Someone's been emailing me about trying to get in.
All right. Well, we've hit 7 o'clock. We can launch. Everybody ready?
All right. So it'll be your show, Mary. Thank you.
Okay. So should I get a cue from Christiana or no?
We can make our own cues. There we go.
There we go. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the third event of an awesome week. A big thank you to Dr. Barrington and Dr. Ostrowski. They ran amazing events. The oration of 12 famous poems or orations that 12 students did were just so moving. It moved me to tears, actually. It was so amazing, the emotion the students put into all that. And then it was so playful and fun in Steve Ostrowski's event today. So this is the third installation, and I'm going to open to tell you that our creative writing faculty have been so incredibly productive in the last 2 or 3 years that I would claim there probably isn't any other creative faculty in the state collectively that has done better or been more productive. Our faculty have been amazing, and we're long overdue in-house to let you know that and to celebrate them. So today is really about 3 incredibly productive creative writers and a assistant professor, Dr. Emmanuel Greenwell, who's a rock star and was publishing academic articles when she was in graduate school. So we really have some high performers here. Before we get started, Professor Burrello wanted me to be sure to give thanks about the Lit Talks. They're curated by the Connecticut Literary Festival, produced by the CCSU English Department, sponsored by the Connecticut Humanities and many other Connecticut literary organizations. Christiana Torres is the production supervisor. Shout out to her. She's been absolutely fabulous. The festival website lists an archive of Lit Talks from the past year. All are free to watch. Next month, you're going to be asked to join for 2 additional talks. This really is a great series. April 8th, Publishing Across Genres and Forms, hosted by Mishka Shubali, featuring Monica Ang and Sam Talent. April 20th, Connecticut Poets Celebrate National Poetry Month, hosted by Jose Gonzalez and featuring Aaron Casando Camuro, Julia Morris Paul, Summer Tate, Pegadiz Shea, Daniel Donany, and Deja Dry. So Connecticut Lit Talks, go to that site. This is just one of many. And big shout out to the Connecticut Humanities and other sponsors for all of this great stuff that we've been doing, that Professor Burrello has been doing with that Lit Festival. So today for me we're always telling you, read your stuff out loud, revision is hard work, don't be afraid of the lousy first draft. And I feel like when we talk about process, all those things are true, but they're also big and they're sweeping. And I intentionally wanted to ask these accomplished authors to go down to the micro level and take a look at a few sentences and how those sentences in the micro level represent something about their macro level of process, of how they get things to page where they feel that it's somehow where they want it to be, essentially pulling it out of stone and making it into something, right? So Again, a big shout out for our three professors. They're just amazing. I'm going to read just a couple of very short excerpts from each of the poets, for each of the authors, and then they in turn are going to take over and make their own selection and talk about, again, what helped them in their process to bring it there. I'm going to start with Sarah Strong, and my little pull is from her amazing new collection, The Mouth of Earth, a incredible book of poems from the University of Nevada Press that came out this year. The poem Sunflowers. This is just a few lines from that poem. His does not look like the face of a man who's just been diagnosed with cancer. No, they look like people who have spent a day on their knees in a garden. Who knows the patience all soil will teach you? Above them, the faces of the sunflowers look the way things look when they have been loved all their lives. Throughout the book, Sarah keeps surprising me because she'll start with something negative, or not negative, but sad, like cancer, and then she moves to this joyful, unexpected thing. All of her poems have this unexpected turn in them for me. And so just these few lines in this sunflower, the person, the narrator's looking at a photograph of two people standing in a field of sunflowers. And as soon as I read this, I wanted to read the rest of the book. So that's how I responded as the reader. Now I want to hear from her as the writer about how she brings those kind of lines. Let me tell you about Sarah. She's the author of 2 poetry collections, Tour of the Breath Gallery and The Mouth of Earth, and 2 novels, The Fainting Room and Burning the Sea. Sarah is currently on work on a 3rd novel for which they received a 2020 Individual Artist Grant from the state of Connecticut. Sarah's work has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize in both poetry and fiction, and their work has appeared in many journals, including The Nation, The Southern Review, Poetry Daily, River Styx, Southwest Review, and The Sun. They teach creative writing at CCSU and the University of Hartford. Sarah is staying sane during the pandemic by taking hikes and stake parts, learning to play chess, and throwing stay-at-home dance parties with their spouse and daughter in Hamden, Connecticut. Sarah, tell us about your process and pick out your lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Break in if you can't hear me all right. I was having a little trouble with my mic earlier. Okay. I'm Sarah Strong. My are they, them. As Mary said, I have written 4 books, and I decided to talk about some sentences in my first novel, Burning the Sea. And I chose something from my first book because the sentences in question, which I wrote very early on the project, they're on page 9, are emblematic of something that has informed my writing process ever since, every single time I pick up a pen or sit down at the computer. So I will read a short paragraph before the 3 lines that I want to talk about so that you have some context. And when I get to the key sentences, I'll wave my hand so that you know they're coming. For context, the narrator here is a young woman who has left home and is obsessively traveling from one place to another. She speaks over and over again of her love of motion without questioning what drives it. And in the passage I'm going to read, she reflects briefly on her parents, who are confounded by her need to get away from them. I carry with me one photograph of my mother. Before I was born, before she was married, this picture was taken. She's standing with her back against the railing of a bridge somewhere, laughing into the mouth of the camera. The background is washed out like fog. It's impossible to see where she is, and when I ask her, she says she doesn't know. It was too long ago. It might be Pittsburgh, she finally says. I think I'm in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh? I want to shake her. She's not in Pittsburgh. The look in her eyes is happy, wild almost, thrilled. She thinks she's in Pittsburgh because that's where she met my father, fell in love. But she's mixing it up, the look of being in love with the look of being in motion. She forgets now. She thinks love is all there is. Okay, here it comes. She thought if she didn't get married, she would just come untied, float away like a balloon from the hand of a child. My father was her anchor. I look at my mother, and see the weight that sank her. So the first part of the sentence, or the lines, she thought if she didn't get married, she would just come untied, float away like a balloon from the hand of a child. The simile, oh, wait a sec, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Sorry, my notes are a little out of order. So just as children are able to speak fluently before they can identify the parts of speech, in writing, it's possible to do things with language without really knowing what it is that we do. And when I look at those sentences now, many years and a graduate degree after I first wrote them, I understand exactly how to describe the power that they exerted over me. When I wrote them, I went, ooh. But at the time, all I knew was that I'd written some sentences that I liked very much, and that the pleasure and the surprise that I experienced writing those lines in some way gave me the courage to persist in this incredibly audacious undertaking of embarking on writing a novel before I had even published so much as a haiku. So now I want to talk a little bit about the reasons that I now understand that those sentences kind of lit up for me, and then how that is emblematic of something that's important to me as a whole when I sit down to write. Okay, so she thought if she didn't get married, she would just come untied, float away like a balloon from the hand of a child. So the simile suggests that this is a woman who's not very stable, who's used to relying on the unreliable, something as tenuous as a little kid's grip on a balloon string, and that's what she relies on to keep her safe. So someone easily untethered. And I love figurative language, in part because it's so economical. That image to me is more powerful and more accurate than several paragraphs discussing the mother's psychological profile using abstract language. And then we get to the next part, which is a contrasting image. My father was her anchor. So in contrast to this flying away balloon, we now have solidity, we have stability, we have an image of something whose fundamental purpose is to hold fast. That's what an anchor does. And then in the final sentence, that interpretation is turned on its head. My father was her anchor. I look at my mother and see the weight that sank her. And so the anchor goes from being an emblem of safety and steadfastness, of salvation, to being the means of a metaphorical death. So these three lines, fairly simple language, they end with an unexpected rhyme, but they have a lot of emblematic and metaphorical weight for me. And when I wrote them, I felt like they had just popped fully formed out of my head, like Athena from Zeus. But of course they didn't. And so what I want to talk about is where they did come from. I think every writer acquires a particular set of tools in their toolkit for bushwhacking a path through to a finished book. And for me, what's the word I want? Machete, the sharpest machete is to learn how to surrender control. It's a decision to restrain the conscious mind in favor of allowing more unconscious processes to take over. And work that's produced in that state, which is now often called flow or sometimes the zone, and what I think it used to be called a light trance. Work that's made in that state, I think, is paradoxically usually more technically accomplished and more subtle and of a higher order of meaning than work that is produced when my conscious mind is more online and more in control. And this isn't to suggest that all you have to do to produce writing that you're proud of is to somehow get yourself into an altered state of consciousness and then you'll magically have a publishable novel. I can attest that it does not. My first book took me 6 years to write and my second novel took 10. But what it has attested to me is that over time, training in this manner of privileging unconscious processes over conscious ones yields more interesting language, more interesting insights, and work that holds more surprises. and this isn't an advertisement for one writing approach over another, but if you are drawn to this strategy, I'll say that Steve Ostrowski's workshop this afternoon is a great example of the kind of exercises that make these bursts of inspiration more likely to occur. He called his workshop Permission to Play with Language. And that is really what it is. It's permission to make use of the vast resources of our unconscious abilities, which then come out informed by the more technical left brain kinds of learning that we often emphasize in the classroom. So I treasure learning about plot arcs and pacing, about the component parts of metaphor, about the power of syntax. But underpinning all of those investigations is a fundamental understanding for me that they work in service of a greater mystery. And that mystery is more likely to appear for me when I relinquish some control. So that's what I got.
Wow, Sarah. One of the things I love is some of the words you're using to describe your process, like bushwhacking. I'm like totally listening on that. We should allow Christiana. I know you're gonna handle some questions. I love that she's bringing up so many interesting techniques. Instead of waiting, I was thinking of waiting to the end. Let's have a little Q&A now, and then also a little Q&A later, so that while things are fresh in everyone's mind. So questions from people about some things that Sarah is discussing, including bushwhacking. Any questions? You can type your question in the box. Yep. Or I know, let's see what we got here.
How do you consciously relinquish control? That's a great question. So one of the things that I do is I begin almost every writing session with a free write. So I make my hand move across the page, and I do them in longhand. Just this is it. I have books and
hold that up again. I love that. That's fabulous.
So I hope you can actually see the words, but this is just like page
old-fashioned journaling.
Of longhand writing. And I'm not trying to be interesting. I'm not trying to be good. All I'm trying to do is keep my hand moving. And sometimes I'm writing like, this is so terrible. I'm so bored. I'm so tired. I didn't do the dishes. This house is too noisy. I'm sick of quarantine. But the point is not to write something good. The point is to shut down the internal editor so that when I put the book away and then open up my document, the internal editor is down for its nap, and I can more freely work on my story or my poem, whatever it is, without constantly having this little voice saying, no, you can't write that. That's stupid, or that's a family secret. You can't tell that, or that comma doesn't go there. You're never going to get anywhere. At least I'm never going to get anywhere until I can shut all that down long enough to get into the zone or the flow.
We have some very interesting points up on chat. Dr. Pozorski was asking, how do you capture those promising lines that come to you unconsciously when you're trying to go about the business of the middle of the day, right? And you spoke in my class, one of my classes, about your capacity to do even that. We looked at one of your poems with regard to a couple that you were watching while working. So what's your answer for that? How do you capture that while in the linear aspect of your everyday life?
It's actually rare for me to think of a line and go, oh, I must write down that line so that I don't lose it. It happens once in a while. And then sometimes I lose the piece of paper that I write it on. For me, it's more like, so my daughter has been learning the violin for about 10 years now, and she does her scales every day so that when she's ready to play her piece, she plays in tune. It's more like that for me. The daily grind keeps me in tune so that when I'm ready to work, that's more when the interesting lines appear. They don't usually show up all by their lonesome.
But I like to hear that because I think it's intimidating if you think that's what happens and then it doesn't happen for you, then you feel like you shouldn't even be keeping a journal, and that's absolutely not the case.
Oh, absolutely. I never know what I'm going to write until I sit down to write it. And if I do, the idea is usually dead by the time I get to the page.
Some people up on the chat have been talking about how they use phone notes app to keep things going. I can see a bunch of people pointing that out. There was another question. Do you think it was a good idea to start writing a novel before getting a degree? What would you say to someone in the same path?
I mean, I think that people who really want to become writers will do it whether it's a good idea or not. There's no guarantee that by getting an MFA, you're going to be a published author. And there's no guarantee that if you don't have an MFA, you're going to be a published author either. I wanted it so badly. I wanted to be a writer more than anything else in the world. And so I persisted for years without having anything published. And so I think the answer to your question is it's a good idea to prioritize what's really, really important to you. And the rest of it, you just have no control over.
That is a great thing to end on. Well, we'll come back to Sarah for questions later, but we should move to our next author. But thank you. Such an insightful take and inspiring.
Thank you,
Again,
Mary.
down to earth and real. It's very real. You don't have some magic to pull the sword out of the stone. It's hard work. It takes years. You prime your mindset just like your daughter primes for her violin. That's a great comparison. We're going to move to Dr. Steve Ostrowski. Again, can't thank him enough for running that event in the middle of the day today. He's had a long day, but a really creative day, and is always giving to our community here. He wrote a gorgeous book of poems with his son, Benjamin. I was especially had an affinity for that because I had written a project myself with my trans son, and I knew the challenges of working with your own child and trying to give them space to have their own work. So I was very excited when I read Penultimate Human Constellation, a father and son converse in poems. And in keeping with the sunflower theme that I picked up in Sarah Strong's work, I turned to Steve Ostrowski's Sun Songs. Will the waxy poetic begonias and optimistic daylilies allow us to listen to their song of simultaneously in and exaltation? As soon as I read that line with the begonias waxing poetic and the daylilies, and you can't see it, but on the page he plays with the word mystic with the Y, and so has multiple levels of meaning in the end and exaltations. There's a bouncy playfulness to the entire book that is represented in these two lines. Playful, open, love of language, any two lines from any poem, and I feel that it would reflect that. So I'm really interested in listening to Steve Ostrowski discuss how he brings that persona to the page so consistently. And there is a buoyancy even when you're dealing with serious topics. So his bio, Dr. Steve Ostrowski teaches in the English Department Teacher Education Program, teaches poetry and fiction in the writing minors. He co-authored a book of poems with his son, Ben Ostrowski, Penultimate Human Constellations, came out in 2018. Again, our three writers in the last 2 to 3 years in our program are performing as well as any faculty in the state. He has 2 other chapbooks. He publishes regularly in a broad range of journals, including Front Range Review and Pinion Poem. And just recently on Facebook, I noticed he announced Seven Circles Press took 3 of his poems, and his short story collection, A Way to Keep You Here, is a finalist in a national competition. I must add, he's a very accomplished painter, and you should check out his website for more of all of his creative stuff. Steve, let's go to you and get you to talk about your process.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for being here. So cool to see students who, I work with in workshops and students I have worked with in the past gathered in an event like this. I'm a fiction writer and a poet, so I wanted to kind of do a little bit of talk on each. So I'm going to keep it to 5 minutes about the one, and then 5 about the other. And since Mary was talking about Penultimate Human Constellation, I'll start with that. Around 2016 or so, my son Benjamin was showing me some of his poetry. He was 19, 20 years old, and I was like, wow, this is good stuff. This is really interesting. And so one Christmas Eve or something, I said, you want to write together? You want to do some collaborating? Just to see what we have. We were thinking about publishing or anything, but he was like, yeah, sure. He's generally game for things like that. So the question then, once I had his enthusiastic, yeah, sure, I'd love to do it. It then became like, okay, so what are we going to write about? We have an agreement to write, but and really, we started writing without a topic, and this gets to the point of the line. The topic was going to be a father and son conversing about whatever they want to talk about, whatever they're experiencing, whatever they're going through, and whatever they can do to comment on each other's, life experiences. But the one thing that I wanted to establish early on was the way we were going to talk. And so I'm going to read the first few lines of the very first poem, and then maybe just talk a little bit more about that. The poem is called "Hey Bud." He calls me Pops. I call him Bud. So we go that way through the book. Hey Bud, let's not talk the way we learned or think in old orbits. Don't want to wind up in the house of worn synapses. I'm just going to stop right there. Those lines, what I intended for those lines to do were to be kind of the beacon that will shine through the whole book of poems, reminding us that whatever we talk about, we want to talk about in inventive ways. We want to play with language, just like this morning's session. That's a big thing for me. I love, reading people who play with language, who find new ways to get at emotions, to get at insights, to get at, what it means to be human. And Sarah mentioned the mystery of human, absolutely critical to me. I have a shed where I used to do a lot of writing, and above the desk is Flannery O'Connor's saying, "The task of the writer is to deepen mystery." The task of the writer is to deepen mystery. I totally buy that. I think that's my life's purpose with writing, is to just keep digging deeper. It's psychological, it's spiritual, it's, all those things. It's human. And so the rest of the book, we go into topics large and small. We imagine ourselves out in the stars. We're in the dirt in the gardens, as Mary commented. Benjamin is writing. At the time, he was a student at a college in Providence, and he'd be riding the buses there, and he'd write about the fumes, the exhaust fumes, and the winter, and the cold, and the ice, and the snow, and then a little bit later, he went to Southeast Asia, and he wrote some poems from there. And then I wrote poems from Southeast Connecticut, and we had a kind of conversation in poems from Southeast places. It just became a really kind of jazz improvisational kind of conversation. The whole kind of premise being that that whatever we wrote, it had to be linguistically interesting. We had to try to find striking images. We had to give ourselves permission to take some risks with the kinds of images. We didn't want to register anything that would qualify as a cliche. Okay, so that's exactly 5 minutes. The other thing I wanted to talk about was a bit of fiction that I wrote, and I will be honest. I hope this doesn't sound like boasting. It's not meant to, but you don't get, as a writer, you don't know what happens to your work, and very few people ever give you feedback. Unless you're maybe Stephen King or something, but or writers who Philip Roth. When I publish something, for the most part, I have no idea if anyone's reading it or what effect it's having on anyone. So anyway, this particular story, it's only a 3-page story, but I gave a reading at one of the community colleges in Connecticut a couple of years back. And a young woman came up to me afterwards. I was signing the book, and she said that this story was her favorite story. And I said, "Oh, that's great, thank you." Yeah, because there are 10 stories in the book, and she started walking away, and she said, "I don't mean my favorite story from the book. I mean my favorite story."
Oh.
So, and that really stayed with me. I mean, to have that impact even on one person, just blew my mind, really. Anyway, the story is, and my fiction writers will relate to this, but the story is about a guy who's walking to the store trying to remember what his wife has asked him to get. Because we talk in fiction about, you don't have to have cars exploding and people being shot and guns going off. Good fiction doesn't have to be about, those kinds of things. They could be about the internal big things. And this is a guy who's got a little baby daughter, and he's walking to the store, and he's absorbing the sky and the leaves changing and the river he's walking by. They're working class people. And he can remember 2 of the 3 things his wife wants. This is pre-cell phones. And it finally occurs to him what he wants. And so I'm just going to read the final paragraph and then talk about how it incorporates things from the whole story. Okay, so he's walking, and this is the last couple paragraphs. Crayons, that's it. Oh, and get a new box of crayons for Samantha. Milk, bread, and crayons, because she flushed a whole shoebox of them down the toilet. Bye-bye, flush, clapping her tiny sticky hands. Bye-bye, colors. But the colors are coming back, little baby eyes. Daddy's bringing back the colors. I'll get her the biggest box they have. One that's shaped like a tear, like the tiers of a theater. With all the classics, burnt sienna, periwinkle, forest green, front loader yellow, amber mood, pitched gaze, concrete, iron river blue, risen nipple, summer gone brown, my tongue sliding down Judy's big pale belly when she's feeling better pink, scarlet letter, flame-filled field, industrial horizon, condemnation gray, blackbird heading south, mother love, solid rock, magenta in the window, goodbye hellbent brother green, red devil's death, forgiveness, God behind the rags. So that list of colors, which starts out as real colors, but then turns into this kind of fantasy of colors, all the colors are based on things that he'd been thinking about in the story. And he'd been thinking about his brother who had jumped off a bridge. He had been thinking about his wife who is pregnant with their second child. He's thinking about, Samantha, the baby that they currently have. And all of these things come out in this gush of his way of expressing it is through all these potential colors in a crayon box. So the whole story is about, remembering to buy crayons on one level, and on another level is about, how the micro object represents, an entire life at a given moment.
Steve, what's the title of the book?
The title of the book is A Pile of Crosses. And it's short stories. And Walking Colors was the name of that story.
Can you go in a little bit more to detail when you mentioned in passing about the plot line, like the wife jumps off a bridge and yet you use this box of crayons? again, it goes back to the pattern I saw in your poetry of blending the deep with the playful. In the same way that Sarah always seems to have such a visual, very visual writer, your distinctive feel for me when I'm a reader is that playfulness comes in no matter what the topic, no matter how dark the backdrop. And I also love that in your session today, Permission to Play with Language, you had everybody work on a little exercise of coming up with their own crayon color.
Yeah.
And so I'm feeling there must be a connection between that. But could you go back just a little bit to talk about your tendency to be blending the darker, oh, the wife jumped off a bridge, and the confidence to bring in something as mundane and light and playful as a crayon box in the middle of a story that included that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, in Permission today, we didn't get to the second to last, the penultimate prompt, which was about paradox. And really, that's what you're asking about. And I am extremely drawn to the concept of paradox, that that in the midst of pain is some joyful thing. You're in the funeral parlor and you're looking at somebody who's lying, in state who has passed away, but then catches this beautiful bouquet of flowers and it's alive and it's bursting, and you're trying to think, wow, that I've never seen quite that color or those two colors put together that way. And so I think that's, I think that's just kind of inbuilt, just part of my way of looking at life is that it's this and it's that, not either or, but both.
Yeah, it's very distinct. Let me see what we've got with questions here. Anybody have a question for Dr. Steve Ostrowski before we move the train along? Eager to have opportunity for a little bit of Q&A, and then we will come back to Q&A at the end also. Any questions?
Tina Orsini. Hi, Tina. And also the inherent irony depending on the context. So I guess she's talking about the paradox, like the paradox, irony very often. Absolutely. Yeah, good point.
Let's see. Christiana said there's one question up here. Is it
Susan
the question,
Gilmore.
how do you get over the ingrained MLA format? Is that the one? How do you take the mundane and make it a story? I struggle with that in fiction and think that the fantastic is what makes a good story. So to read that question again from Danny, how do you take the mundane and make it a story? I struggle with that in fiction and think that the fantastic is what makes a good story. Thank you, Danny.
Yeah, Danny, great question. I think you dispense with the notion that anything is really mundane, and you start to see the mystery in the comment, and you start to kind of scratch the surface of any person, any character who seems like a bland character. I mean, you can scratch the surface and turn them into something full of secrets and full of experiences and full of fantasies and things that you could really do a lot with as a fiction writer or a poet. So, yeah.
Susan Gilmore is asking how you decide whether something will be a poem or a story.
That's a good question. Good question. I'll have to get back to you on that one. A lot of us are writing multiple genres, so that might be an open question for everybody later on or something.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you all very much. I know we're on a timeline here, so
yes,
I appreciate the time to
Thank you so much. Fabulous. This has been fabulous, and I want to note that our magician behind the scenes is making things possible. You'll see a little green toggle here. Buy Steve's book, Penultimate Human Constellation. All you got to do is click. So we've got some good things going. Jotham, I see you up on the screen.
Just like that, magic.
You are magic.
I wish we were in the same place, Mary. That's kind of, but you know.
I know. And this has been so heartwarming day for me. I miss everyone. I miss the students. I miss the faculty. And I'm in such a good mood right now. I want to ring my bell again and again, my nerdy bell, because this is just very joyful. thing,
Yeah,
seeing everybody so
it is.
engaged. So Jotham Burrello, who doesn't know Jotham Burrello? He's everywhere,
Everybody.
all over the state. And we are so lucky to have him. I am going to read a little piece from his new novel, Spindle City, which is set in a mill town of Fall River in late 19th century, that I think so captures what drew me into the entire novel. And what's sort of interesting after listening to Sarah and Steve, who are really fully realized points of view of their way of seeing, this is a great execution of a character's way of seeing, not Jotham Burrello, but the character that drives the novel is so fully realized as the person that you follow through the book. In this particular little section, the main character, Joseph's wife, Elizabeth, is dying. She's very young, but she's very ill. And this is a snapshot of the caretaker, Evelyn, and she's in motion in the room. At this stage of the fight, Elizabeth's hollowed bones couldn't support her whole weight. Cord like a bird's bones was how Dr. Boyle described the cancer's invasion in a recent note to Joseph. It was Evelyn's idea to move into the small room at the end of the hall, handling Elizabeth's dirties that earned her the household's respect. Evelyn believed cleanliness curried favor with the Lord. Evelyn backed noiselessly into the darkened room. Elizabeth had instructed her to double up the lace curtains during daylight hours to keep her mother's furniture from fading, giving the room the hue of a bruised peach. There was such a wonderful big overview in the opening paragraph where you see the proper context of people sending notes back then, calling laundry dirties, the deep religious devotion. So the author, the narrator, in this case, Jotham Burrello, is locating you in time in the 19th century. And then the next paragraph zooms in so tight, like the closest camera watching Evelyn move in the room. So this big context tight keeps happening in the book. And then this incredible attention to craft with phrases like hue of a peach. The book at the line level is just clearly someone spent years putting this together. And that someone was Jotham Burrello.
Too many years. Right.
Too many years, and we're going to find out why it took so many years. There's a quick bio before we introduce our next guest. In addition to his fine work here as an associate professor of English in the writing minors, Burrello is the director of the Yale Summer Writing Workshop. His novel, Spindle Cities, was longlisted for the 2021 Hemingway Debut Novel Award, a monster accomplishment, by the way. He is the founder of the Connecticut Literary Festival and curator of the Lit Talk series. He's the publisher of the award-winning Elephant Rock books. He's written and produced multimedia on the craft of writing and edited The Craft, essays on writing from the Yale Writing Program. He's a proud winner of the New Yorker Caption Contest. And when away from his desk, Jotham raises boys and flowers on Muddy Feet Flower Farm, the Nutmeg State's premier cut flower farm. Let's hear about Jotham's process. Thank you, Jotham.
Yeah. Hey, Mary, thanks a lot. I'm always inspired by my colleagues. Thank you to Sarah and Steve. It was, thinking, first of all, Mary, thanks for reading my stuff. I just want you to read the book to me. That'd be wonderful. We could just log in later and have that happen. That's fun to hear. It's funny. I think my process varies on where I am in the project. And I'm very aware of that at my age now. Sarah, they mentioned this notion of kind of inspiration in journaling. You hear what you hear, right? It was interesting when Sarah was talking, I was listening like, what does that mean to me? And I was thinking I use my journal and I write anywhere. So I'm currently working on a new book, which I'm trying to figure out. Danny's over here talking about how do you get inspiration and think about it. There's no such thing as writer's block. I don't have no time for writer's block. I'm writing all the time. And I'm just trying to get the draft out. I mean, I want to get a draft and I can edit it. I think revision is God's gift to writers, but I need to earn it. And I need to earn a draft. And when I'm drafting, I knock the conscious critic off my shoulder and I just write my ass off. Today, I went to the bank, and this is a great example of this. Sarah was talking about like writing. So these are slips from Key Bank, right? And the woman's like, I can't meet with you. And I'm like, fine, I'll just wait over here. So I started writing on them. And I just started writing notes in the bank because I knew I had an idea. And I was like, well, this is it. And it was about, it was all about image. It was about, this is not what I was going to talk about. It's about image. It was in a hoop house, plastic house. And this woman has a torch and she's burning them up at the bottom of poppies. And I wanted it to be like a lightning bug. And I couldn't figure out what the light looked like from a distance. But that was what I was doing today. But I want to talk about the book and about a scene in the book. So I'm going to do kind of that left brain stuff. I think will complement each other. I'm going to go very line level. I think of editing kind of as a long shot, a medium shot, and a close up. And when Mary was talking about this, I was thinking, I'm going to get right on the line. So I started looking through old things of the book. So on my desk, and I kind of cursed Mary for this because you don't want to go back and look at your old writing sometimes. But I have journals, right? I have 3 journals from the novel. This one was fun. I haven't looked at this forever. And I actually have a note in here. This is weird. I was writing like at a funeral or something on like a piece of notepad, and I kind of stapled it into my journal. And then the other thing I have are just reams of pages of the book that I need to burn, but I haven't. So I'm going to talk about just a few lines from the book, or line level. Now, this is from an old draft. This is what it looked like back in the day with notes. I mentioned in the chat about having a writing group. This actually says, Mary, at the bottom, it says damned copy. And it took me to figure out who the hell Dan was. He was an old friend of mine in Chicago. And so this is a copy I gave to him. I put his name on it, and he gave me feedback. So I had feedback from people in a writing group. So I'm going to try to put this on the screen. So this is, so again, the book Spindle City, it takes place in Fall River, Massachusetts, at the early part of the 20th century. And in the scene, I'm going to read just a little bit. And of course, there's a large Portuguese community in Fall River. And I have a character named João, and he's a young man. And one thing I have to do in the early part of a project is I have to know who the hell this guy is. And I'm not Portuguese, but I did all my research. So I'm going to read you a little bit of a line. This takes place, we're going to travel to the Azores archipelago off the coast of Portugal. And he has just dove in the ocean, and he's retrieved the necklace of a woman, a young girl named Lourdes. And the plan was this: whoever gets the necklace gets to marry Lourdes. That was the idea, at least. And this is right after he's come out of the water. So I'm going to show you, if I can do this on my screen, I'm actually going to show you 2 paragraphs. If it'll let me do it. It's not going to let me do it, Christiana. That's too bad. All right, I'm going to read to you.
You can blame it on me.
No, we'll blame other things on you. Not this. It just won't let me do it. Okay, so this is what I wrote a couple years ago. So he's just came out of the water, and it says, he felt something fall against his throat, and he remembered Lourdes, the contest, the silvery minnows like knife blades. Yes, he has won. João reached for the necklace to be sure that it was really there. He took a shallow breath and broke into a wicked coughing jag. His throat stung. He doubled over in pain. Lourdes knelt close, blocking the others. Her mouth pressed on his upturned ear. She rubbed João's throat. In a low voice, she promised herself to him. So that's not so bad. But as I look at it now, this is the opposite of, I would say, what some of what Sarah's talking about. I'm really looking at it now a couple levels from just a craft point of view. And these are the things I talk about. A few of my students are out here, the things I talk about all the time. So I'm really thinking here, I thought about my verbs, and I thought about the vantage point of what I'm trying to do here. This is limited third person. This is a very intimate scene, though. And if you continue reading, you realize that João was a poor farmer's son, and he's never going to be able to get Lourdes. It's never going to happen. But in this moment, he's won. So as I looked at this, in the version I was going to read in the book, I kept the same line because I love those fish. So the line is the same. He felt something fall against his throat and remembered Lourdes, the contest, and the silvery minnows like knife blades. João fingered the necklace. He took a shallow breath and coughed. He rolled onto his side. Lourdes knelt close, her soft knees touching his silky chest. Her lips fell on his upturned ear. She rubbed João's back. In a low voice, she whispered, I'm yours. So as I went through the edits, I mean, I was just doing this today and I was like, what did I change? And I really noticed a couple lines. I'm thinking again about vantage points. I'm thinking about in my head, how close are we to the intimacy of this young girl who's now kneeling, touching him, and then whispers in his ear. But I didn't start it that way. I started it, okay, it's the overall storyteller. And then it says, in the first version, it says, it says, yes, he has won. Zhao reached for the necklace to be sure that it was really there. So when I looked at that line today, I'm like, well, what am I doing? I'm pulling us way out of the scene. I'm seeing it from up here. Yes, he has won. Well, no shit, he has won. He's wearing the necklace. In the previous scene, he's already won it, and we knew the meaning of that. So he's already won. Everyone knows that, including the reader, and he does too. And then I had the line, he reached for the necklace to be sure it was really there, which is the voice of the overall storyteller, again, kind of filtering the action. So from a craft point of view, I'm like, well, that's just not necessary. And that's all replaced with just a simple sentence of, he fingered the necklace. So it brought me to that verb. And I love the verb. And the verb is doing a few things for me. I think verbs, sometimes they need to get us across the room, but also they really have to have an attitude, or they have to intuit something, or be a motive. And I love the idea that I could have used, I could have said tentatively, but I'll never use an adverb to save my life because I'm not James Joyce and I don't know how to do it. So fingered kind of, it shows me what he's doing, but it also gives the sense of his, this kind of notion of he's just touching it like he's excited, right? He's fingering this thing he's discovering. So I really like that verb. And then if we just skip ahead a little bit, you see, it said originally this thing about lords. I didn't know how her movement was, and sometimes I will map things on a piece of paper. So it says, first of all, it said, he broke into a wicked coughing jag, which are two words that I'm like, why jag? That's like Jotham's word. That's not, my overall stellar, that's not like 19th century where that didn't work at all. And then wicked, I guess I thought, in the East Coast, we say wicked sometimes. That didn't work. So he can just cough. Why do I have to even say anything? Right? He's just somehow drowned himself for love. He can cough. And then it says, she knelt close. And I kept that, but then how was she going to move? And in the revision, I have her soft knees touching his silky chest. And two things, before it didn't say that, he doubles over in pain. It's more removed, but I want it to be more intimate. And I like the notion of her soft knees, her youth, and the fact that then you see the proportion of where they are too with his silky chest versus his back. And then as I continue, it says her lips fell. And in the original, she had her mouth resting, which is another thing where, again, I think the vantage point pulls out mouth resting. I must have to think about how does a mouth rest on an ear versus her falling into his body to create that intimacy. That's another thing. And this is at this point of the process, Mary, too. I'm thinking about this. This is how I want to do it. And I'll end with the last thing. And actually, we can thank my friend Dan. He wrote on here. He just scribbled it out where it says she promised herself to him. She scribbled out and wrote. He wrote whispered, and then he wrote dialogue, and then he said reaction. So Dan was leading me to it, but he's right. Why do I just let her say something and summarize that in her own voice versus saying she promised herself to him? I think that's just flat as hell. And now she whispers, "I'm yours," period. So we hit it and get out. And I think that really shows her intimacy of what she felt for Zhao at this point. And as we learn really fast, they can never be together. But he does keep the necklace. If you read the book, you'll find out what he does with it. It's kind of the trigger of the whole scene. So that's my take. But I think, this notion of what we're talking about process, you'll find your own. Maybe my colleagues were too nice to say it, but the only way you're going to do this if you sit your ass in the chair and write. It just takes a long time. I can do it at the bank, but I got to do it at home too. I just got to write, and that's my process. I write draft, and I cut it. And these folders behind me, there's a lot of stuff in here that never made it in the book, but I had to write it to figure out what my characters were about. So,
Jotham, thank you for pulling the folders out. I know you were grumbling about it, but this has been riveting. Yeah. And I noticed the way you moved with your hand there at the end. I had watched a clip at the New York Times where they dissected someone who had put together a song, a Billie Eilish song with her brother. and he brought out a folder and had sticky notes, and it had all these layers and people's comments. And then when he described when he thought they had hit it just right, he moved his hand up just like you did. And I love the parallel of this organic process, the sound, the feel. And you're questioning, and the need of this outside editor. And I love that you showed that there's so many layers of post-it notes and line edits, and then somebody else's edit of your work. So thank you for digging that up, because that's what today is about. You're talking about a handful of lines, and then look at how you have files about the process behind those lines. And that's just riveting to me.
It takes years to do this too. I mean, it took me a while to write this book. Sometimes it comes quick, but if you want to get it right, and it's about tempo and beat, I think you can read so much with your ears. I mean, today you could have read that first paragraph to me, and I thought, well, I did it this and I did this and that, because I can hear it really clear. The problem, of course, is it's so hard to do it in your own work, and I mean, there's no question about that. But you get better. I mean, you get more trained, and then you get some help too from your friends that are great readers, right? You'll never have better readers than you have in your classes today. So exploit them and make them, work for you.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Questions for Professor Jotham Burrello after this really awesome description of his process. Some questions up here. How many of you keep back files of your drafts? Right? They do show process. It's tempting to throw them out, but I have to say there is something of value in them sometimes. I've sometimes dug things out that I use in another piece, right?
Mary, yours are going to be donated to a library someday.
I doubt that.
My kids are just going to burn mine when that happens.
No. Again, you can see up here, you can visit Jotham's website, buy the book. We're really promoting our faculty today. These books are beautiful. The craft at the line level for all three of these authors is one of the reasons why I wanted to do line level. We should keep moving, because I really want to get to Amanda Greenwell, because so many of you are dealing with academic writing. So applause for Professor Burrello for digging up the old files and the Post-it notes. I really appreciate that you did that, Jotham. It was very cool to see that. It takes time to do that. So our next guest is Dr. Amanda Greenwell, and I'm thrilled. What's that? There she is. I'm thrilled that you can come, because we need to understand how this creative process that we've been talking about applies to academic writing as well. And so we really appreciate having Dr. Amanda Greenwell here, because she's published while she was a PhD student. She's now an assistant professor with us. But the fact that she understands the need for creative thinking, of free associating, of carrying your thinking with you as you move through your life every day, of taking notes. The process is actually probably quite similar. And we felt like it was a natural progression, actually, to bring in Professor Greenwell. She does sometimes teach Introduction to Poetry, which is the reading of poetry, and also advanced composition. But today we're really interested in her talking about the way we use these creative thinking patterns and processes for academic writing. So let me give you her bio, and then we're going to turn it over. Amanda Greenwell is an assistant professor of English and English secondary education specialist. She teaches advanced composition and introduction poetry, but we've also brought her on today because the process of creative thinking and clear writing applies across to all genres. And we wanted a specialist to speak to crafting academic papers. Somehow she managed to publish several academic articles in major journals while still completing her PhD at UConn, and was the recipient of the Honor Article Award for the for the Children's Literary Association. Literature Association, right? Children's Literature Association. Sorry about that. Her research specialties include literature written for young people and the figure of the child in American literature. And she's particularly interested in texts that push back against narrow narratives of belonging. She's also a teaching consultant for the Connecticut Writing Project And before taking a tenure track position with us, aren't we lucky? She actually won the CCSU Teaching Award for part-time faculty. So here's Professor Amanda Greenwell. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Mary. Can you hear me? I didn't get to do a mic check before.
Yes.
Great. Fantastic. So I want to start, I think, by mentioning that, you know, academic writing has stigma attached to it, right, in terms of its technique. It's generally known for being very dense, and bad academic writing can actually be so dense that it's difficult to get through. Bad academic writing can also get kind of bloated on its own content, but good academic writing is still going to be dense because it's highly specialized and because it's speaking to a specialist type of audience. But it can also benefit from and exhibit, I think, some of the same concepts that some of our earlier speakers were talking about. So Sarah, they spoke about the importance of economy. And I think economy is one of those concepts that transfers really well into academic writing. And Mary, as you mentioned, invention, right? I mean, if you don't have an idea, then you're not writing academically. You have to have something new to say, something that hasn't been out there before. And so academic writing often has to balance this, you know, inventiveness with this sometimes heavy terminology that's specific to a field you're writing in. It has to be precise. One of the things that we have to do as academic writers is name things that we're talking about. We can't go by implication, which is one of the lovely tools that many creative writers have. And so we can't use implication, but we can still, I think, get a little bit creative or poetic with some of our word choice, right? With some of the diction that we use to get at these larger abstract ideas that we're trying to name. And so in the piece that I'll read in a little bit, just a couple of sentences, it's the naming of the idea that I'm going to focus on and talk a little bit about the stories behind some of the words that I chose and the processes that helped me get there. I chose a piece particularly because it's from, I chose this passage because it's from a piece that it handles a technical argument about the way that the story is built. And so I really appreciate Jotham's comments about narrative distance that he was just talking about in his own work, because that's something that I'm working with in this piece as well. So to introduce the project, these few lines are from a pretty large project that I'm working on that's about the child gaze. So children looking at things, actual sightlines of the child, as a narrative cue in American literature. And I'm especially interested about when that narrative cue is used to signal or confront that the text is butting up against these hegemonic narratives of national belonging in the United States. So in this project, I name different types of child gazes, different ways that children have been constructed in text to look at things. And one of those ways is what I call the counter-surveillance child gaze. And that's when a child is, and we say like talk back to authority. So I'm looking at when kids look back at authority and how that matters and how sometimes the non-vocality of that is particularly evocative. So one of the pieces of literature that I use to exhibit how the counter-surveillance child gaze works is a short story by Langston Hughes. He's got wonderful short stories. I know that his poetry is often what most students are introduced to when they first learn about Hughes, but he's got some really fantastic short stories. One of them is called The Red-Headed Baby. This story knocked me over when I read it. And so if you want to think of the start of my process, I mean, it was literally just kind of shock, right? And coming up with this idea. I have such wonderful things written in the margins of this particular story, like, oh yes, this syntax, or that dash though, right? Those are my like affective reactionary, comments. And yes, someone just commented, I write in my books. I write all over my books. I can't stand not writing in my books. I have a conversation with the text, right? That's how it is. I'm documenting how I'm responding to it. So anyway, in this story, The Red-Headed Baby, the main character is a white man. And he is represented through three indirect discourse, which means that the story is not in first person, but the narrative texture kind of reports sort of from inside the man's mind. And so even when the text isn't necessarily reporting his dialogue or saying he thought, the lines in the text are very clearly focalized through this man's perspective. Okay, so he is our main character. His point of view is privileged in the texture of the narrative. But he has a mixed race son. And this is a son that he actually discovers during the story. That's kind of the point of this very short story. And that son plays a really pivotal role in this text. And what's very gripping to me is that the role the son plays is not a speaking role. The child actually can't speak. The one action that he has in this story is that he toddles into the kitchen where his father is, and he looks at him. I mean, that's kind of it. That's what he does. But it creates this just massive shift in the text, and in the way that the man reacts, because the man can't handle seeing this. It's called the red-headed baby. So he's seeing his own white features reflected in this child, and he just kind of can't compute, right? And so the story really ends up as this like extreme indictment of racist authority. And that's what the child is doing. So when I first read this story and saw this happening, the first thing I had to do was be like, who wrote about this? Someone has to have written about this already. And I'm looking, and everything that's out there on this story, and there isn't a lot, is about the father. That's what people have focused on. No one's done anything about the child. So first of all, when you're an academic writer, that's a very good thing. I often have, students who are like, oh, I can't find any research on my topic, or no one's written about this. And I'm like, that's awesome, right? That's what you want. You have a thing to say, right? You are primed for invention because you're able to add something that hasn't been out there already. So what I'm going to read to you are two sentences that are from, I guess, what you would call the thesis statement portion of this paper. It's not the entirety of it, but these 2 lines I want to focus on because I think they show a bit of that balance between the strictures of academic writing, but also the inventiveness that you can employ when you do it. So the lines go like this. Hughes's child functions more as symbol than character, acting as cipher and fulcrum in a battle the text stages between the narrative and its own white male protagonist. Thus, the story plays overtly with the subject-object relation that positions gazer and gazee in a power hierarchy, a stance ultimately destabilized by the counter-surveillance child. So I know it's dense, right? But these sentences were a long time coming in my process. Sarah wants me to read it again. So
can you do that, Amanda?
I will. Yeah. And then as I talk about some of the phrases, I'll kick back to them.
Well, they feel like poetry on the ear, so read them again.
That's lovely. I'm so glad to hear that, because the rhythm is important in academic writing, because otherwise it can be relentless on the page, and that's not what you want. So Hughes's child functions more as symbol than character, acting as cipher and fulcrum in a battle the text stages between the narrative and its own white male protagonist. Thus, the story plays overtly with the subject-object relation that positions gazer and gazee in a power hierarchy, a stance ultimately destabilized by the counter-surveillance child. Okay, so let me kind of tell you a bit of a story about how these came about. These 2 sentences, as they exist now, did not exist this way in earlier drafts, but portions of them did. And I think this is part of the process of academic writing, is sort of like a gathering exercise from drafts you've written so far. So every time you draft when you're writing academically, you're going to create something that's worth keeping. And then the task becomes like, what's the thing that's worth keeping, right? Because you've wrestled with this idea. And so when I write academically, I actually do a whole lot of free writing, and several of our speakers have talked about that already. And I free write before I have an idea, after I have an idea, after every single draft. So between drafts, I'm free writing because I'm trying to name more things. I'm trying to write further out of my brain, like, but really, what is the precise way to talk about this particular story? So the line that I start with here, that the child functions more as symbol than character, that took me some time to get to for a couple of reasons. One of them is that as a person who studies children in literature and children's literature, one thing that we kind of hate is that writers are always tossing around children as symbols, and it gets kind of annoying after a while, because when writers use children as symbols, they tend to evoke these really kind of hackneyed notions of the child, like, oh, look, it's innocent. Oh, look, it's vulnerable, right? And so there was something in me that was resisting wanting to say that this is what Hughes was doing, because I love Hughes and I like what he was doing. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that, like, the child doesn't do enough in the story to be a character. You know, he's a fixture almost to a certain point. And so I eventually, when I let myself call him a symbol, it opened up a way of thinking about him that still, I was able to avoid the vulnerability or the innocence, because what the child is doing is he's like indicting his racist father with his eyeballs, right? Like, that's not normally how we use the child as symbol. And so I had to kind of get myself there. That was almost part of a resistance process for me. And I had to get over myself and get over my, like, oh, but I don't want to participate in calling the child, you know, no, like, that's what Hughes is doing. And it's part of the genius, I think, of this particular story. So after I name him as a symbol, I then kind of, I clarify that. I say that he's acting as cipher and fulcrum in a battle the text stages. And so cipher, because cipher, like, children are often thought of as ciphers, because when you use them as a symbol, you can kind of stretch or fit into them whatever you want. The whole point is, like, how do you want to kind of think about this kid? So he does act as a cipher, and Hughes is, again, without putting words in the child's mouth, without telling us how to think about the child, because remember, the whole story is it's focalized through this white man, right? So without telling us overtly what this child should be like, he is clearly crafting a story that is asking us to understand exactly what that child is looking at when he looks back at his father, right? So cipher worked here. And when fulcrum came up for me, I just love the word fulcrum. First of all, like, I mean, I you will see it many times in my writing, and I probably overuse it. So, but here's the thing: fulcrum is such an awesome word when you're thinking about narrative textures. But for me, this word didn't come up for this story until I think I was in the conclusion of an early draft, and I sort of wrote myself into it, as we often do, you know, when we're free writing or drafting. You write yourself toward the thing that you're like, that's it. That's what I was trying to get out. And so once it was out, I was like, well, I'm not going to waste this in the conclusion. This is going to pop up into my, you know, introduction. This has to be sort of my, you know, part of my grand statement about what's happening here. And this is also kind of a, you know, a feature of academic writing. You ruin the ending. Like, that's what you do in academic writing. It's okay to spoil the ending. You want to be upfront about what your ideas are. You want to be upfront about what you're going to argue, because then you get to spend the whole rest of the time making sure your reader agrees with you by the end of it, right? So, you know, they know what they're walking into. That doesn't mean that your conclusion becomes redundant. That means that you're going to write your way to something deeper, more interesting, right, by the time you get to the end. But fulcrum mattered to me because, you know, it connotes all of these concepts about balance and leverage and mechanics. And because I'm talking about the narrative dynamics of this story, I wanted that kind of, like, mechanical notion in there. I wanted fulcrum just worked on so many levels. And, you know, it is a battle, right? When I got to the battle, the text stages between the narrative and its own white male protagonist, battle is one of those words that, it's metaphoric here, right? Like, there's no actual, like, battle, right? I'm saying, like, okay, this text has a tension in it. But one of the things that I think academic writing requires us to do is be kind of bold about our assertions. and be not afraid to kind of theorize something a little bit more abstractly. So instead of saying something like, oh, the child, as a character contradicts the, father as the focalized kind of narrative point. I mean, it's true, it contradicts it, but that's not particularly gripping, right? That's not exactly like a powerful way to say that. And so when I do my free writes between my drafts, part of what I'm doing, to use Steve Ostrowski's language, is I'm kind of giving myself permission to kind of use some words that might not normally come out if I'm like, dutifully typing at a computer on the linear screen, really trying to kind of, you feel boxed in. So when I free write, it's by hand. I think Sarah said this, maybe Jotham. It's not linear, so I can have arrows everywhere, and I might write a word and immediately cross it out or circle it and draw an arrow and have like 3 or 4 different synonyms up here because I'm kind of testing them and I'm choosing which one makes sense. But battle came out of a free write, and it's not, I mean, this is a normal word. We use it in everyday language, but it made sense for this particular piece. And so, as I constructed that first sentence, it was a long process. That sentence took me several drafts to get to, but each of its phrases were somewhere in an earlier draft or in a free write. The second sentence, where I say that the story plays with the subject-object relation, I remember this kind of coming out all at once. And I wanted play because I think that's what Hughes is doing. We have all these creative writers talking to us tonight about how you're playing with your language, you're testing things out. And so if I'm going to write about a creative writer, if I'm going to write about Hughes and what he's doing, I'm going to call it play, because that's what he's doing with this. I mean, it's a very disarming story because you don't expect what's going to happen. And so there's a playfulness about using a toddler to get this done. There's a playfulness about invoking a child, right, as the one who's going to look back at this authority. And you have to remember, right, he's positing, a Black child looking back at a white man. And this book was published in 1934, right? Wow. So Hughes is, in the Harlem Renaissance. This is where the tradition starts, right? In the sort of early 20th century is where the tradition in Black writing begins of kind of thinking of the child as the way forward. And so we see Hughes working with that here and working, I think, with it in a really powerful way. So, that's, a little bit of a sense, I guess, of how I got to this moment in my piece. When I start talking about subject-object relation and gazer and gazee, I know that I'm reaching back in my mind to, when I first read like Gayatri Spivak, I'm like reaching back into feminist theory, kind of like, pulling that into what's happening here. And so it's that density and that economy. If your writing can be freighted with these concepts so that your words aren't just precise, but they also connote, or constellate around them some meanings that are, also mobilizing the ideas that you're conveying, then I think that can be really powerful. So, and I'll just say this, academic writing can be fun in the sense that when you have that moment where you're like, you figured out a phrase or you figured out a word, you should like celebrate that. I mean, my students know, we've talked about like, what do you do when you write a good sentence? And it's like, you stop and you take a victory walk, right? Or you like treat yourself to the snack that you've been wanting to have. There's something, I think, when we celebrate a good sentence in academic writing, we're celebrating an idea, but we're celebrating the language that we captured it in. And I think it's like that synthesis between the two things that can be
Amanda, we're running out of time, but this was breathtaking. Yeah. I mean, I am so ecstatic. We brought you as the bridge speaker in process. This was absolutely riveting beyond what I expected. And I'm so glad. I hope that everybody knows that we're taping this so that others can look at it. It's just it's a master class in how to discuss just a few lines. I want you to know I've run a lot of events, but I've never asked my guest authors to just bring in a few lines and then excavate them basically. And you're really coming back to, what's worth keeping. Many of you said that. We are running out of time now, and I want to allow the last bit of time for questions in general. We had some general questions for Burrello. Did you have an idea that you tossed out but came back to? Was one. And did you feel you were done with your research of a character that's out of your culture is another. So Jotham, you want to answer that? And then we'll see if we can't get some questions also for Amanda. Jotham, are you there?
I think they have to bring him back up.
Yeah.
Right.
There I am. I was off stage I was in the green room having some M&Ms.
Would you like me to repeat the questions?
No, I saw it.
Okay.
For Miles, they're about 16. My character's about 16. When I know when I'm done with the research outside my culture, well, I did a whole bunch of research. I did a bunch of interviews, and I always feel like, I heard once, when you're doing research and you can kind of see yourself coming back around, you've done enough. And at some point too, I have to know enough kind of to be dangerous, but I still have to have that surprise we were talking about. So then I kind of want to put the research out of my head. I mean, the thing about working on a book or any project is, you can call it up like a Rolodex. I mean, you're so into it, and that's why we go on retreats, and that's why we want to glue our kids' mouths shut and lock them in closets. I mean, you need to have that intensity of it. I mean, the funny part about my book, Spindle City, I want to forget the whole thing. I mean, I want to work on my new project and learn those characters. So to answer your question simply, I do enough research that I feel confident enough. And then you do have people, maybe you have readers and people kind of call you on it. But, all people are about desire. I'm really believing you can write about anything. What do they want? How do I kind of intuit? How do I see that? And João becomes a big part of the book. He's in the whole novel. He grows, and he grows as a man. I mean, he's a Portuguese man, but he grows as a man. And he's also, but I was pretty excited. There's a lot of young women characters or women characters in the book. Worked the hell out of them. Read a lot about them, and they surprised me every time they opened their mouths. I was so excited to write them, and they're the moral center of the book. So if they didn't work, the book would have failed. So readers have told me it hasn't. So I'm pretty confident, but it takes a while. And the other question real quick is about throwing stuff out.
Yep.
I didn't. I think that if anything, nothing probably came back. There's a lot of scenes I just wrote I didn't use. There's one scene, a very pivotal scene, a reader late in the process said, this isn't working and here's why. And I scraped it all. That was really hard. I'd worked on it for a long time. It was about 15 pages at the end of a chapter and just hitting delete. I was like, okay, I got to reimagine this. And what it forced me to do, again, back to character, I just rediscovered these characters in new ways. And I learned they spoke French. I learned to deliver babies. I learned all these things about these characters. I had no idea, but I didn't kind of force myself. We were talking earlier about being surprised. I went what was obvious and easy for me, but it wasn't a surprise, and it made the book better.
Thank you, Jotham. We have a question also for Amanda Greenwald. How often do you find that ideas you think of have been researched or written about already by Julia Wanuk?
Oh, I mean, to a certain extent, pretty often. But, and that's because when you first read a book or a piece of lit, right, some of the ideas that occur to you are very likely going to be ones that have occurred to other readers, right, on a first read around. I think the difference comes in sort of, what does a second read reveal, and I've talked with some wonderful, mentors and friends about this in academia too. Sometimes you see what's out there and you get disappointed. You're like, oh man, people did write about this already. Like there already is an article on that. But if you read the article, you'll probably find that not everything you were thinking is in there. There's something else and then you kind of pivot a little bit and you think about that thing and you see where that takes you, if that becomes a focal point or an inroad. So, we can have a moment, or you'll be on a project, and while you're on the project, an article or a book gets published, and you look at the title and you just get a sinking feeling like, oh my God, someone was doing this already and now it's out there. But there's usually enough of a difference because you are a unique reader, right? Because you are noticing things because of your background and what you bring to a text that other people might not. So sometimes it just takes some extra, really kind of dig in and see if you have enough legs on an idea to be part of a conversation with other critics, but not repeat what they say.
Amanda, someone had a question very similar to the one for Jotham, which is, a research question, but in this particular instance, the focus is on what happens when you start to lose yourself in the research, which for an academic can really happen. So talk a little bit about putting the brakes on that.
Yeah, I'm not a good person to ask that question of, because I do that. I love the research phase. I love to read all the things and see what connects. And I guess where I know to put the brakes on is at a certain point when I'm doing the research, I realize that I'm reading things that confirm stuff I've already thought about or already read about, and I'm not discovering as many new things as I was earlier on. And that's usually a good sign, is when stuff starts to seem repetitive or starts to seem like, oh yeah, I know this already. It's like, but you didn't know it a couple months ago. You know it now. So that's a good sign that you've gotten a pretty good sense of what's out there.
Which is interesting, because Jotham's answer was similar. You start to see almost like the cat's chasing the tail at some point, so you know you need to stop. Yeah. Other questions?
That's a John McPhee idea. He has a lot of good essays on research. But I think the other thing you're doing is you're writing while you're researching, right? I'm not just sitting there reading the stuff and stopping. I'm taking notes, and then I'm going off like on those pieces of paper, and I'm writing a scene. I mean, it's building up to the point where I think at one point you have to say, I have enough. I think in fiction, compared to what you're saying, I always remind myself, I'm writing a story, not a history. It's great. I mean, my book's about Fall River, Massachusetts, Lizzie Borden. There's plenty of history. I'm not going to write better history. It's not my job at all.
I see a question that sort of leads into a question I have generally for all of you, including Steve Ostrowski, who is still here, but we have a limitation on how many people we can have up. About this idea that how do you continue to validate yourself as a writer when you're at a crossroads? Like, you have an idea, it might be sort of stalled, or you've got things that have been rejected. All of you, if you could answer a little bit about keeping the engine going, even when maybe you're getting rejections or you're there in the middle of something, I think that would be a good question to close on. How do you keep the engine going? How do you not wear out? Sarah, how about you? We haven't heard from you for a little bit. How would you answer that?
I think that after a while you get to a point where it's kind of like going to the gym. You maybe don't want to go, but it feels worse if you don't go.
That's good.
That's a good description.
Yeah. Okay. I'll stop there. And
that's good. I like that. Jotham, how about you? What would be your answer? Because we're running out of time. So that's good. This is good.
I'm at the gym and I don't want to go right now. What was the question? I started thinking about what you were
I'm very curious, and a couple of people have asked about it. How do you keep the engine going when either you're getting rejection or you're having to need to self-validate yourself in the middle of a complex project?
Yeah, I'm too old to self-validate myself. Right? I can't impress my kids. I can't impress anybody. I don't need to self-validate myself. I mean, I love the work. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I want to do it. The pleasure. Someone said to me, "What's the measure of success?" Well, getting nominated for a prize and everything is fun, but I mean, I've already figured it out. What I just did with you, that's the fun part for me. I mean, it's the riddle of writing. It's hard, and when you can figure it out and you're satisfied, that's all I really need. The other stuff is fun, but I mean, having readers is fun, but I love the process. And
I'm quoting you now. Riddle of writing. What? Amanda, how about you? How do you keep yourself going?
Well, in the moment, I usually just take a break and take a walk. I got to get out of that headspace, and my body helps me do that. So if I move my location, that's a good thing. But in the long term, that usually means I need to talk with someone. I need to talk with an advisor or a mentor or a peer and hash through some ideas, because you can get some immediate gratification that way. If someone's saying like, no, hey, that's actually really smart. Let's go with that, run with that one. And that way, you don't have to wait for the 6 months later letter from a journal to figure it out.
These are great answers. And again, a big thank you to all of you for such a thoughtful day from the Steve Ostrowski's program to tonight. I mean, I'm not even tired. I'm like, this is so stimulating for me, and I am thrilled that this worked out. I was just taking a gamble with the sentences, and you all delivered so thoughtfully. And thank you again to Christiana Torres, who's been doing all the behind-scenes work for us, and to the Connecticut Lit Festival that was sponsoring this, and the work that Jotham has done to set up these virtual talks. So, and the audience, we can't thank you enough for staying this late with us. and your questions and the respect you're showing your professors by coming and hearing about their work. We really, really appreciate that. So a good night to everyone, and a salute to our fabulous guests. Thank you so much.
Thank you for making it happen, Mary.
Thank you.
So fun.